As a non-U.S. resident or foreigner, what is the process of creating and maintaining an LLC in the U.S.?
We get this question a lot. I think it's just the perception that if you don't live in the U.S., you can't have a company in the U.S., and that's completely wrong. We register LLCs literally every day for non-U.S. people. You don't even need to physically come to the U.S. You don't need to have ever come to the U.S. We've registered LLCs for people like Indians, for example, who have to get visas to the U.S. They've never been to the U.S., and they probably never will come to the U.S. There's no requirement for you to be there. If you register with us, it's really quite simple. You go on our website, businessanywhere.io. You go to the section for business registration, and you just follow the steps. You give us the company name, you answer a few questions, you give us your personal details, and that's pretty much it. It's really straightforward. If you go through the worksheet, we do have videos that walk you through every single step, answering all your questions. I suppose if you watched every single video through the process, it might take you as much as 30 minutes to go through it. If you just follow the on-screen prompts and skip the videos, you can probably get through it in 5 or 10 minutes. So it's super easy, super quick to do it.
Is it possible for a non-U.S. resident to create their own LLC without hiring anyone?
No, because they need to have a registered agent in the state where they're forming the entity. And so if they're non-U.S., presumably they don't have their own location in the U.S. So in order to register an LLC in any state, you have to have a legal registered address in that state. That is a legal requirement. In order to do that, you either need to have your own location or you need to hire a registered agent that has a location in that state that can serve as your registered agent. So registered agent, just so you know, what they do is they serve the role as the registered address for your company in that state that allows them to receive official notices like from the tax office, the Secretary of State, or what's called SOP mail, service of process mail. That would be mail that you have to sign for. And so that is a legal requirement that somebody has to be available during working hours during the week to sign for SOP mail, and you must have a registered address in that state. So if you don't live in the U.S. and don't have a location, you can't do it on your own. You have to have a registered agent.
Are there any other things that are more difficult for a non-U.S. resident? Getting an EIN, opening a business bank account, what recommendations might you have there?
Sure. When we open LLCs for non-U.S. people, they have the option to have us do their EIN application for them. It is much more difficult for a non-U.S. person to get an EIN than a U.S. person. A U.S. person, it can be done online. You need to have a U.S. address, personal address, and a social security number. If you don't have that social security number and a U.S. address, and both are required, which would be the case for a non-U.S. person, obviously. So you would apply as a foreign application. The only way to do that is by paper, and that has to be done either by mail or by fax. That form is actually relatively complicated to fill in. There's a lot of variables in that form, and if you don't know what you're doing, you will inevitably tick a box wrong. The problem with that is the form is called the SS4. So when you do the SS4 application with the IRS, once you send it in, either by mail or fax or whatever, if you did something wrong, 90% of the time, they don't tell you anything was wrong. You would get nothing back from them. So if you're a non-U.S. person doing the SS4 application, there's a very high probability you're going to get something wrong on that form, and you submit it, and you'll just never hear from the IRS. And I mean, like, ever. They just won't respond to you in most cases. Occasionally, if you have a fax number or a U.S. mailing address, occasionally, and I do mean occasionally, like literally 1 out of 10 times maybe, they will send it back to you telling you what the error is to correct it. But then again, if you don't have a U.S. address or a U.S. fax number, they have no way to send it back to you anyway. And they're not going to mail it to you overseas, and they're not going to email it. They won't email anything. Yeah, I would highly recommend, if you're a non-U.S. person, allowing us to do the EIN application on your behalf. And it does take a while. Like for a U.S. person with a social security number and an address, in most cases, we get those back same day. Occasionally, It takes a couple of days to get those, but they're relatively quick. For an EIN application for a non-U.S. person, that takes anywhere from 2 to 12 weeks to get it back from the IRS. So it's a much more difficult, much slower process. So if you're a non-U.S. person wanting to register an LLC, you do need to plan a little bit ahead. Like if you have a business deal that is next week, I mean, it's not going to happen because you have to have an EIN number to open a bank account. And it takes at a minimum 2 weeks to get the EIN back as a non-U.S. person. It can take up to 12 weeks. So it's a little bit of a frustration, but it is better that you plan ahead. If you know you're starting a business or you have a business deal or an investment project or something, better to do it way in advance so that you know you get that EIN in time, and then you can go through the bank account opening process also, which can also take some time.
Is that difficult to do on your own to create a business bank account as a non-U.S. person?
It can be. So we have a banking partner that we work with that's in our platform. They do work with non-U.S. people, and you can do it online without a need for a personal visit because they're basically a fintech platform. So they don't have physical branches anyway. So they do allow you to do it online, and they do work with non-U.S. persons. You do need to have a U.S. mailing address. However, they will not open the account for you without a U.S. mailing address because for their regulations, they have to have a U.S. mailing address, but also they're going to mail you your debit card and they won't mail it to a foreign address. So you will have to have a U.S. mailing address. We do offer also a virtual mailbox service. So you can, that's an add-on if you need that with us. If you're a non-U.S. person, you will need a physical, like a mailing address in the U.S., either from us or somewhere else. You're going to absolutely have to have that to open a bank account in the U.S. Whereas if you're an American, maybe you use your home address or for mailing, or maybe you got a P.O. box somewhere or a friend's address or an office. You may not need that if you don't need that longer term. But as a non-U.S. person, you absolutely have to have that mailing address in the U.S. to open a bank account. So you can do it with our banking partner that's in the platform. There are a couple of others out there. If you want a traditional brick and mortar bank account, but if you're opening a bank account with a traditional big bank in the U.S., brick and mortar bank, as a non-U.S. person, you will have to physically appear in person. There is no workaround for that. There's no legal workaround for that, I guess I should say. I have seen people claim they can do it without you appearing in person to open an account with one of the big banks, but it's not legal. I do know it happens, but it's usually like somebody has a friend working at the bank and they'll kind of slide it through. I wouldn't go that route if I were you, because if the bank's compliance ever finds out that you didn't physically appear in wet ink sign those documents, they'll just close your bank account like that. They'll shut it down immediately. So using these shady arrangements to open brick and mortar bank accounts is probably not a good long-term strategy for your business. So you will have to physically appear in the bank, show your personal details, your passport, ID card, and stuff like that.
So we have an LLC, EIN, and a bank account. What's the process to maintain an LLC for a non-U.S. resident?
So for a non-U.S. resident to maintain the LLC, it's from the Secretary of State level. So using Wyoming as an example, that's the same whether you're a U.S. person or a non-U.S. person. We just have to file your annual report. We have to verify that you still have a registered agent, registered address in the state, pay the compliance fees and all that stuff. With Business Anywhere, we handle all that for you. It's all automated. As long as you have a valid credit card in your account on file with us, that happens automatically. You'll get a notice from us in advance of that happening saying you have a renewal coming in. Well, we have a series of notices that come like 30 days, 14 days, 7 days, but you'll get a series of notices telling you that you have an upcoming renewal coming. And as long as your card is on file, it'll charge you the correct amount for the state. And then our software automatically does that for you. So there's nothing for you to do. In that case, that's at the Secretary of State's level. With the IRS, it depends on the nature of your business. At a minimum, as a non-U.S. person with a U.S. LLC, you will need to file what's called an IRS Form 5472, which is a form that tells the IRS that entity is more than 25% owned by a foreign owner. It does not create necessarily a tax obligation for you, but you're just informing the IRS that the owner of that entity is a non-U.S. person. Now, from there, you may or may not have a tax obligation based on the nature of your business. Let's say you're selling physical products in the U.S., like you've got an Amazon store or a Shopify store. You will have a tax obligation for that business, and you'll personally, as an individual, you'll have to file, as a non-resident, you'll have to file a 1040 NR. 1040 is the standard individual tax return. NR stands for non-resident. So you have to file a 1040, and then the profits from that LLC will be reflected on your personal tax return. And if your LLC was taxed as a corporation, there's another form you have to file. I believe it's an 1120. I forgot the letter for it, but there's another form. But that would be relatively uncommon for a non-U.S. person with an LLC. But if you did have that physical nexus or ECI, like you're selling physical goods, or you had an office, or you had employees, you will have to pay tax on that additionally. But the good thing is, if your business is completely virtual, you do consulting, coaching, maybe you sell digital products or a software business, and you don't have like nexus in the U.S., you just file the 5472, and that's it. You don't have a tax obligation in the U.S. Personally, you might have a tax obligation based on your personal residency and tax residency situation. But in the U.S., it's super easy, and that 5472 is filed once a year by April 15th. It's a 3-page form. You can hire an accountant to do it for you for a few $100, or you can do it yourself in like 20 minutes, and you can even fax it into the IRS. Pretty easy form to do. And then the other thing you do need to do, this is a new requirement, and this is not only for non-U.S. people, this is for anyone, but the new requirement as of January 1st, 2024, through the Treasury Department, or the FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Unit of the Treasury Department, is called the BOIR, or the Beneficial Ownership Information Report. If you had an entity registered prior to January 1st, 2024, you have until, 2023, my mistake. If you have an entity registered prior to January 1st, 2024, so it was registered in 2023 or earlier, you have until the end of 2024, so December 31st, 24, to file this BOIR, or the Beneficial Ownership Information Report. If you have a new entity created during the year 2024, you have 90 days from the date it was created to file that BOIR. And that is a form, basically you're telling the Treasury Department, or the FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Unit of the Treasury Department, you're telling them who the beneficial owner or owners are of that entity. And you need to report any owner that owns 25% or more, that either has ownership or control. So for example, if you had an LLC, all foreign owners, and everyone owned, let's say you had 11 owners that all owned 9%, you would need to report the controlling owner. Even if that owner only owns 9%, you still have to report it even though it's less than 25, because they're the controlling owner. You wouldn't have to report the other 10, but you'd have to report that one person that had controlling interest in it. There are some exemptions to that. If you are a regulated financial institution in the U.S., like a bank or a financial savings and loan, or a credit union, or stockbroker, brokerage account, or stockbroker, or if you are a registered money advisor, like you have a financial license for your business, you don't have to complete that BOIR because you're already regulated by another government agency that requires beneficial ownership information. If you are a publicly traded company, you don't need to file the BOIR. Or if you are doing over $5 million in gross revenue, you don't need to file the BOIR. But otherwise, you do. Or if the business is inactive, meaning it owns no assets, including a bank account, it owns no real estate, no assets whatsoever, and has no turnover, no like financial transactions, then you don't need to file it. So, for example, maybe you registered an LLC 5 years ago, you used it for 3 years, you haven't done anything, you have no bank accounts, it owns no real estate, it owns nothing, but you keep renewing it because maybe down the road you might want it and you like having it with some history. You wouldn't have to do a BOIR on that one. But if you had even a bank account that had $100 in the account in the LLC's name, then you would have to file a BOIR on that. So that is a requirement for U.S. and non-U.S. persons that is new as of this year.
As you can see, if you live outside the U.S., the process for starting and running an LLC is a bit complicated. If you want Business Anywhere's help getting your LLC set up properly, getting your EIN, opening a business bank account, and more, use the link in the description below and enter the code BEGIN15 at checkout to save 15%, excluding the state fees. If you want to see the entire process of creating an LLC with Business Anywhere, watch this video right here, and I hope to see you in another video. Bye-bye.